Yeah, you read the title, and I guess I'm gonna have to explain my reasoning. Sova has multiple abilities, most of which resolve around a bow, which requires you to have quite good accuracy, especially with the recon bow, which isn't difficult standing still, but can be tricky while moving around. It isn't so difficult with the shock bow due to its radius, however we'll get into that later. But before we get into the thick of the video, could you flip the subscribe button and turn on notifications? That would make my day. The like button is also there, and I would appreciate it if you'd flip that too. Anyway, back to the video. There are many different ways of using the recon bow, but I'll tell you my main three ways. Starting with the horizontal long-range scan, and yes, I made that up just seconds ago. The long-range scan is the most commonly used recon tactic, used on defense and offense for locating the enemy. It is most specifically used for deep penetration into the base, which is possible when using one or two bounces on the bow. But don't forget that the bounces aren't that reliable, and it is entirely possible for the bolt to bounce out of the map or right back at you. So using one bounce is highly recommended, as it can't bounce off an unseen surface and cause you agony. Quite a tongue twister that. It can also be used to scan for counter-attacking enemies approaching the planted spike from the corridors. Keep in mind that this specific tactic does show the enemy where you are, so if you don't scan anyone, you'll gain nothing, but the enemy may now know where you are, and that can cripple attacks. The second tactic is the short-range arc scan, used for sending a recon bolt over containers or walls. This is done quite infrequently, as taking out your bow is time-consuming and leaves you vulnerable, so I would only suggest it if you have a teammate with you. The final recon tactic is the aerial scan, kind of like a mortar. This scan is quite tricky and is most effective when performed at the beginning of the round. To perform an aerial scan, you must fire your arrow at full power, or less, depending on how long you want it to be in the air, and aim it at the point of attack. This is very useful, as it allows your teammates to know where the enemy is by the time they enter the point. It also removes the vulnerable stage from the scan, as you are nowhere near the enemy when you fire. Onto the next ability, which is the shock bolt. I only use the shock bolt in two ways, for damage and for visibility, or rather the lack of it. Starting with damage, when the shock bolt lands, it expands rapidly over the course of 0.8 seconds, then detonates in a 5-meter sphere, dealing less damage the further you are from the center. This is where I can best explain why Sova is a trickshot operator. When Sova is on the battlefield, hiding round corners is a very bad idea if Sova knows where you are. This is because of Sova's glorious gravity-defying bouncing arrows. Simply aim at a doorway, add a bounce, and the problem goes away. There is one problem with this though, and it is the time that it takes. Due to the length of time between firing the arrow and their destination, if the enemy is observant, they can hear or see the arrow coming, and move out of the way. This is why you should never use the shock bolt out in the open. It would look really cool if you pulled it off, but it's like a 1 in 100 chance, so it's best not to try. The safest place to fire it is while out of sight or very close to where they are. When you fire the shock bolt lets out a blue shimmer effect. As a result, the enemy can only slightly see through it. This can be quite useful when you're trapped and you want to fire it into a doorway so you can run away. Though I wouldn't advise using it because shock bolt's a lot more useful for attacking the enemy with and doing damage, due to its high damage. Next on the list is the drone. The drone is quite simple. It has two inefficient rotors that let off a lot of noise, and a dart gun whose darts broadcast 3 times the location of the person they strike, kind of like the recon bolt. This allows it to be quite useful for checking around unsafe corners, or scouting out the point. This is one of the most useful abilities for everyone on the team, including yourself, because it helps you understand the layout of the other team, as well as sets you up for your ultimate. On that note, the ultimate is a very powerful ability. When you activate the ability, you have a short timer to fire 3 shots, which each do 80 damage at the enemy. Each shot has a short charge up, a similar length to your recon and shock bolts charge up. This is very useful for clearing out the enemy if they are bunched up, because it shoots through walls. Do remember to not be predictable with your shots, because it isn't impossible for the enemy to dodge all of your blasts, which may lead you to assume there's no one there and then get killed later on. To avoid circumstances like this, it is best to leave a 1 to 2 second between your first and second shot to throw off the enemy. And when all of that combines, you get something that looks a little bit like this.
Spike planted.
Yes!
Let's go, Sova, let's go.
Got him!
Hey, got my point. Coming through.
One
Off my
enemy
point.
remaining.
Get off my fucking.
Yes!
But I've given you all the information you need to know, so it's up to you to use it correctly. Anyway, it's been fun. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you next time.